The encounter at Westchester Executive Airfield. The Westchester Executive Airfield gleamed under the morning sun, its glass facade reflecting the sprawling tarmac where private jets stood proudly. It was a place of luxury, frequented by corporate executives, celebrities, and the ultra-wealthy. The polished floors inside the terminal spoke of exclusivity, and the crisp uniforms of the staff reinforced its air of privilege. Isaiah Brooks stepped out of a sleek black SUV, his demeanor calm and composed. Dressed in understated but undeniably expensive athletic wear, he carried a leather backpack slung casually over one shoulder. At 40 years old, Isaiah was a self-made tech billionaire whose rise from a humble Brooklyn neighborhood to international acclaim was nothing short of remarkable. Despite his immense success, he preferred a low profile, focusing his energy on philanthropic ventures, particularly in underserved communities. Today, he was heading to Silicon Valley for a critical meeting. The agenda: a groundbreaking initiative to provide free tech education and resources to students in low-income areas. His private jet was prepped and ready for takeoff, its engines already humming softly in the distance. Inside the terminal, Frank Miller, a veteran security guard with over 2 decades of experience, surveyed the morning's travelers. Frank was known for his stern demeanor and unyielding vigilance. Though he prided himself on his dedication, his sense of vigilance often veered into outright prejudice. He judged people quickly, and today was no different. As Isaiah approached the security checkpoint, Frank's eyes narrowed. The casual athletic wear, the lack of flashy jewelry, and the calm confidence, none of it fit Frank's mental image of a private jet traveler. He made a snap judgment: this man didn't belong here. "Excuse me, sir," Frank called out, stepping in front of Isaiah with a hand raised. "This is a private terminal. You're not supposed to be here." Isaiah's expression didn't falter. He met Frank's gaze evenly. "I'm aware. I have a flight scheduled." Frank's lips pressed into a thin line. "This terminal is for private jet travelers only. Maybe you're looking for the commercial airport down the road." Isaiah raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I'm not lost," he said evenly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Frank crossed his arms, his stance becoming more confrontational. "Do you have proof of that?" "ID, boarding pass." Reaching into his pocket, Isaiah pulled out his driver's license and a digital flight confirmation on his phone. He held them out for Frank to see. The guard barely glanced at them before dismissing them with a wave. "Anyone could fake those," Frank muttered. "If you're trying to sneak in here, I'd suggest you leave before this gets worse." The blatant dismissal struck a nerve, but Isaiah's years of dealing with prejudice had taught him restraint. "I'm the owner of the jet I'm boarding," he stated firmly. "I'm not sneaking anywhere." Frank's expression hardened further. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this isn't your place. If you don't leave, I'll have to call for backup." Around them, a few passengers had begun to notice the escalating tension. Curious glances were cast their way, and a few murmurs rippled through the terminal. Isaiah took a deep breath, suppressing the frustration boiling inside him. He'd faced subtle racism before, but this outright hostility was more than he'd expected today. Nearby, Julia Carter, a flight attendant assigned to Isaiah's jet, noticed the commotion. Recognizing her boss, she hurried over. "Mr. Brooks," she greeted warmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Good morning. Is everything all right?" Frank turned to her, frowning. "You know this man?" "Yes," Julia replied sharply. "He's the owner of the jet I'm assigned to. Is there a problem?" Frank hesitated, his scowl deepening. "I was just verifying his credentials." Julia's tone grew icy. "Well, they're verified. Let me take Mr. Brooks to his plane." But as Julia and Isaiah began to move past him, Frank stepped forward again, blocking their path. "Hold on. Just because she says you're the owner doesn't mean I can let you through. Protocol is protocol." Isaiah clenched his jaw. This had gone far enough. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Yes, this is Isaiah Brooks," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I need airport security at the terminal immediately. One of their guards is preventing me from boarding my own plane." Frank's face paled slightly, but he held his ground, his stance rigid. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder as they realized the gravity of the situation. A few even began recording the encounter on their phones. Within minutes, 2 senior security officials arrived, their expressions serious. The lead officer, a woman named Teresa Morales, approached the group. "Mr. Brooks," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Teresa Morales, head of security. I apologize for any inconvenience. What seems to be the issue?" Isaiah explained the situation succinctly, his tone measured but firm. Julia corroborated his account, adding her own indignation at Frank's behavior. Teresa's face darkened as she turned to Frank. "Is this true?" Frank stammered, his previous confidence faltering. "I was just following protocol." He didn't look like. "Like what?" Teresa's voice was sharp. "Like someone who could own a private jet. Is that what you're implying?" Frank's silence spoke volumes. Teresa turned back to Isaiah. "Mr. Brooks, I deeply apologize for this unacceptable behavior. I assure you, we will address this immediately. Please allow me to personally escort you to your plane." As Teresa and Julia guided Isaiah toward the tarmac, the murmurs in the terminal grew louder. Frank stood frozen, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. Isaiah glanced back briefly, his expression unreadable. This was far from over. Exposing prejudice in plain sight. Isaiah Brooks walked alongside Teresa Morales and Julia Carter as they headed toward the tarmac. The hum of private jet engines filled the air, a stark contrast to the charged silence inside the terminal moments earlier. Isaiah's expression remained composed, but his mind churned. This wasn't just about him being denied access to his own plane, it was about the prejudices that continued to thrive in places meant to represent privilege and progress. "Mr. Brooks," Teresa began as they neared the jet, her voice tinged with regret, "I cannot apologize enough for what just happened. Frank's behavior was entirely unacceptable and does not reflect our values here. I assure you, we'll take immediate action." Isaiah gave her a polite nod. "I appreciate your words, Ms. Morales, but this isn't just about today. This incident is a symptom of a larger issue, one that goes beyond this terminal and this guard. It's about the assumptions people make, and the biases they act on, without even realizing it." Teresa nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right. And addressing it starts with accountability." Once Isaiah boarded his jet, Julia ensured he was comfortable before stepping into the cockpit to coordinate with the pilot. Isaiah pulled out his laptop, intending to review his presentation for the Silicon Valley meeting. But his focus was elsewhere. The humiliation he'd just endured replayed in his mind, sparking a resolve to turn this into a teachable moment. He drafted a quick email to his public relations team. Subject: Incident at Westchester Terminal. Team, I need your help addressing an incident I just experienced. A security guard at Westchester Executive Airfield prevented me from boarding my plane, assuming I didn't belong there. I want this story told, but not just as an anecdote about me. I want it framed as a conversation about prejudice in spaces of privilege. Let's craft a statement that highlights the broader issue and offers actionable steps. Let me know your thoughts. He hit send, feeling a small sense of relief. Isaiah had spent years using his platform to advocate for marginalized communities, and this moment was no different. If anything, it was more personal. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, Teresa Morales confronted Frank Miller in her office. The once confident security guard now sat with his shoulders slumped, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Frank," Teresa began, her tone sharp, "I need you to explain your actions. What exactly were you thinking when you blocked Mr. Brooks from boarding?" Frank shifted uncomfortably. I thought he didn't belong here. He was dressed casually, and what? Teresa interrupted. You assumed he couldn't possibly own a private jet because of the way he was dressed? Or was it something else? Something about the color of his skin? Frank's face flushed. That's not what I meant. I was just doing my job, following protocol. Your job, Teresa said, leaning forward, is to ensure the safety and security of this terminal. Not to gatekeep based on your personal biases. You embarrassed a prominent client, tarnished our reputation, and exposed this terminal to legal consequences. Frank's head dropped. I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't erase impact, Teresa snapped. You're suspended effective immediately. There will be a formal review of your actions, and I strongly suggest you reflect on your behavior in the meantime. By evening, Isaiah's email had set his PR team into motion. They crafted a thoughtful statement, one that struck a balance between calling out prejudice and encouraging dialogue. The statement was released across Isaiah's social media platforms and sent to major media outlets. Today, I experienced an incident that reminded me of the work still left to do in addressing prejudice. Despite being the owner of a private jet, I was blocked from boarding by a security guard who assumed I didn't belong. This isn't just about me, it's about the biases we all carry and how they manifest in harmful ways. My hope is that this moment sparks conversations about how we can create truly inclusive spaces, even in the most privileged settings. Let's turn this into an opportunity for growth. The response was immediate. Thousands of comments poured in, ranging from messages of support to stories of similar experiences. The hashtag #BelongingEverywhere began trending, with people sharing their own encounters with discrimination in unexpected places. The next day, news outlets picked up the story. Headlines like, Tech Billionaire Highlights Prejudice at Exclusive Airfield, and Private Jet Owner Blocked by Security Guard Sparks National Debate dominated the morning news cycle. Isaiah's phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from friends, colleagues, and even strangers expressing their support. One call stood out. It was from Cheryl Daniels, a prominent civil rights activist and founder of the Equality Now initiative. Isaiah, Cheryl said warmly, I saw your statement. You handled that situation with such grace and purpose. Thank you, Cheryl, Isaiah replied. But it shouldn't have happened in the first place. Agreed, she said. Which is why I think we should collaborate. This incident has struck a chord, and we can use this momentum to push for real change. Let's work together to develop a training program for businesses and organizations to address implicit bias. Isaiah's eyes lit up. I'd love that. Let's make it happen. As the week progressed, Frank's suspension turned into a full-blown investigation. The terminal's parent company issued an apology and announced mandatory bias training for all employees. But for Isaiah, the focus was on the bigger picture. Alongside Cheryl, he began drafting a proposal for the bias training program, envisioning it as a transformative initiative that could be adopted nationwide. At the same time, Isaiah continued preparing for his Silicon Valley meeting. His resolve to fund tech education for underserved communities felt even more urgent now. He knew that empowering the next generation was key to dismantling systemic inequalities. As his jet soared over the country, Isaiah looked out the window, the clouds below a reminder of how far he'd come, and how far there was still to go. This wasn't just a detour in his journey, it was a mission within a mission, a chance to turn a personal slight into a catalyst for change. Little did he know, the ripples of this incident were just beginning to spread. Amplifying the conversation. The media storm surrounding Isaiah Brooks's experience at Westchester Executive Airfield showed no signs of abating. By the third day, it had grown into a national conversation, extending beyond the incident itself to tackle broader issues of implicit bias, systemic prejudice, and the barriers people of color often face, even in the most exclusive spaces. Isaiah had always been intentional about how he used his platform, and this time was no different. Early that morning, he convened a virtual meeting with his public relations team, Cheryl Daniels, and key members of his foundation, the Brooks Initiative for Equity and Innovation. "The momentum is there," Isaiah said, addressing the group from his home office. Behind him, a bookshelf lined with awards and photos of past achievements hinted at his storied career. "But we need to ensure this doesn't become just another viral moment. I want to use this as a launchpad for lasting change." "Cheryl, what's the status on the bias training proposal?" Cheryl, who appeared on the screen from her Washington, D.C. office, smiled. "We're making excellent progress. Our team has outlined a comprehensive framework for organizations to implement training that not only addresses implicit bias but also emphasizes accountability and cultural competency. We're calling it the CLEAR Initiative: Conscious Leadership, Equity, Accountability, and Respect." Isaiah nodded, his interest piqued. "That's brilliant. Let's finalize the details and prepare a public launch. I'll cover the initial funding through the Brooks Initiative. I also want to reach out to corporate leaders and influencers who can amplify the message." One of his PR managers, Lisa Huang, chimed in. "We should also think about partnerships with educational institutions. If we can incorporate this training at the university level, we're setting the foundation for long-term cultural shifts." "Agreed," Isaiah said. "Lisa, you and Cheryl can work together on that. Let's aim to announce the CLEAR Initiative by the end of the week." By midday, Isaiah's social media statement had drawn responses from high-profile figures across industries. Celebrities, athletes, and activists voiced their support, while others shared their own stories of discrimination. Among them was Ava Rodriguez, a prominent actress known for her outspoken advocacy on racial and social justice issues. Ava's post read, "What happened to Isaiah Brooks is unacceptable but, sadly, not surprising. This isn't just about one guard at one airfield. It's about a system that allows these assumptions to thrive. Let's back Isaiah's call for action and make spaces of privilege more inclusive for everyone." #BelongingEverywhere. The hashtag #BelongingEverywhere, which had emerged organically after Isaiah's initial post, now trended globally. Social media became a hub of discussion, with users sharing stories of similar experiences, demanding accountability, and calling for systemic reforms. Meanwhile, back at Westchester Executive Airfield, Frank Miller's suspension had left a noticeable void. Teresa Morales had called an emergency meeting with the terminal staff to address the fallout and outline the next steps. "We're at a crossroads," Teresa said, standing at the front of the room. Her tone was firm but measured, her eyes scanning the faces of her employees. What happened with Mr. Brooks was more than an isolated incident. It was a failure to live up to the values we claimed to uphold. Moving forward, every single one of us has a responsibility to ensure this never happens again. One employee, a younger guard named Carlos Ramirez, raised his hand hesitantly. "Ms. Morales, what exactly are we doing to address this? Are we just talking about it, or are there real changes coming?" Teresa's lips tightened, and she nodded. "That's a fair question, Carlos. Starting next week, all employees will undergo mandatory bias training. We've partnered with an external firm to facilitate this, and the training will be ongoing, not just a one-time session. Additionally, we're implementing new protocols to ensure incidents like this are escalated appropriately and reviewed by a diverse oversight committee." There were murmurs of approval, but also some skepticism. Another guard, an older man named Hank, crossed his arms. "So, we're just supposed to take the blame for one guy's mistake?" "This isn't about assigning blame," Teresa said sharply. "It's about accountability. Frank's actions reflected poorly on all of us, and now we have to rebuild trust. If that feels uncomfortable, good. Growth is uncomfortable." Isaiah spent the afternoon reviewing the finalized plans for the CLEAR Initiative. By evening, he had scheduled a live-streamed announcement, inviting Cheryl and several other prominent figures to join him. The goal was clear: to channel the momentum into actionable change. When the live stream began, Isaiah sat in a well-lit studio, a sleek Clear Initiative logo displayed behind him. He started with a personal reflection. What happened to me at Westchester Executive Airfield was frustrating, but it was also revealing. It revealed how deeply ingrained biases can be, even in places of privilege. But this isn't about pointing fingers. It's about pointing the way forward. He outlined the Clear Initiative's mission and objectives, emphasizing its focus on education, accountability, and respect. Cheryl spoke next, highlighting the collaborative efforts that had gone into creating the program. The Clear Initiative isn't just a training program, Cheryl said. It's a movement. A movement to redefine what leadership and inclusivity look like in the 21st century. Viewers responded in real time, their comments flooding the live stream with messages of support and gratitude. By the time the announcement ended, the hashtag #CLR initiative was trending alongside hashtag belonging everywhere. The next morning, Isaiah received an unexpected call from Teresa Morales. "Mr. Brooks," Teresa began, her voice steady but earnest, "I wanted to thank you. Your decision to address this publicly has forced us to confront our own shortcomings. I'm committed to ensuring our terminal becomes a model of inclusivity and respect." Isaiah appreciated her candor. "Thank you, Ms. Morales. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. If there's anything I can do to support your efforts, let me know." As the week came to a close, Isaiah reflected on everything that had transpired. What began as a moment of indignity had evolved into a powerful catalyst for change. The Clear Initiative was gaining traction, media coverage remained strong, and conversations about implicit bias were happening in spaces where silence had long prevailed. For Isaiah, this was just the beginning. The road to equity and inclusion was long, but he was determined to walk it, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Turning momentum into action. The Clear Initiative's announcement had set off a ripple effect, and Isaiah Brooks was at the center of it. The following morning, Isaiah found himself inundated with requests for interviews, partnerships, and appearances. News anchors praised his poise and vision, social media influencers amplified his message, and advocacy groups reached out to align their causes with his initiative. Yet amidst the whirlwind of attention, Isaiah remained focused on the mission at hand, ensuring that this moment of reckoning translated into tangible, lasting change. In a glass-walled conference room overlooking Silicon Valley, Isaiah met with a group of corporate executives representing some of the world's largest tech companies. The meeting had been arranged quickly, spurred by the attention his live stream had garnered. Cheryl Daniels accompanied him, ready to help solidify partnerships for the Clear Initiative. "Thank you all for being here," Isaiah began, standing at the head of the table. His calm demeanor belied the urgency he felt. The Clear Initiative isn't just another diversity and inclusion program. It's a blueprint for redefining leadership and accountability in the spaces we influence. He gestured to a presentation on the screen behind him. "Bias training is a start, but it's not enough. We need systemic changes, clear benchmarks for accountability, transparent oversight, and mechanisms to ensure inclusivity isn't optional but integral. That's what Clear offers." The room was silent for a moment, then one executive, a woman from a major social media company, spoke up. "Mr. Brooks, I admire your vision. But how do we ensure buy-in from people who see this as unnecessary or even threatening?" Isaiah nodded. "Resistance is inevitable, but it's not insurmountable. The key is framing inclusivity not as a favor to marginalized groups, but as a business imperative. Inclusive companies outperform their peers. They attract better talent, foster innovation, and build stronger customer loyalty. The data is clear, inclusivity benefits everyone." Another executive, a middle-aged man representing a global e-commerce platform, leaned forward. "What's the timeline for implementing Clear? And how can we support it?" Cheryl spoke up. "We're rolling out pilot programs in key industries over the next 6 months. Your company's participation would be invaluable, not just financially, but as proof points for the initiative's success. By the end of the meeting, 3 companies had committed to funding and piloting the CLEAR initiative, while others expressed strong interest. Isaiah and Cheryl left the room feeling a sense of accomplishment but knowing there was still much work to be done. Back in New York, Teresa Morales was overseeing the first round of bias training sessions at Westchester Executive Airfield. The sessions were led by external facilitators and attended by every employee, from security guards to administrative staff. The atmosphere was tense but constructive. One exercise involved employees sharing experiences where they'd felt excluded or judged based on assumptions. Carlos Ramirez, the younger guard who had challenged Teresa in the staff meeting, recounted an incident from years earlier. "I grew up in a neighborhood where most people didn't look like me," he said. "I remember a teacher assuming I was in the wrong classroom because she didn't think I belonged in advanced math. That stuck with me. I guess I never thought about how I might be making those same assumptions about others." The room fell silent. Even Frank Miller, sitting with his arms crossed, seemed to reflect on Carlos's words. Teresa hoped that moments like these would plant seeds of change. Meanwhile, Isaiah's email inbox was flooded with messages from individuals who had been inspired by his story. One stood out, a 16-year-old high school student named Mia Johnson from Atlanta. "Dear Mr. Brooks, I saw your live stream about the CLEAR initiative, and it really inspired me. I've faced discrimination at school and sometimes feel like I'll never be taken seriously because of how I look. But seeing someone like you stand up and create change gives me hope. Thank you for showing people like me that we belong everywhere." Isaiah's heart swelled as he read her words. He responded immediately. "Dear Mia, thank you for your kind message. Your voice matters, and your experiences are valid. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. If we all work together, we can create a world where everyone's potential is recognized. Stay strong and keep believing in yourself. You inspire me, too. Best. Isaiah Brooks." On the 5th day after the incident, Isaiah received an unexpected call from the CEO of the company that managed Westchester Executive Airfield. "Mr. Brooks," the CEO began, "I want to personally apologize for what you experienced. We've initiated a full review of our practices and are implementing the CLEAR initiative as part of our efforts to rebuild trust." Isaiah appreciated the gesture but remained pragmatic. "I'm glad to hear that. Accountability is the first step. I'd like to stay involved to ensure these changes are meaningful and sustained." "Absolutely," the CEO agreed. "Your input will be invaluable." That evening, Isaiah attended a town hall event in Brooklyn, his hometown. The venue was packed with community members eager to hear him speak. Standing on the stage, he felt a wave of nostalgia and responsibility. "When I was a kid growing up here," he began, "I never imagined I'd one day be flying private jets or sitting in boardrooms. But I also never imagined I'd still have to prove I belonged in those spaces. What happened to me wasn't unique. It happens to people every day in different ways. That's why we're here. To make sure no one ever has to question their worth or their place." The audience erupted into applause. Isaiah spent the next hour answering questions, listening to stories, and connecting with his community. It was moments like these that reminded him why he fought so hard for change. By the end of the week, the CLEAR initiative had gained significant traction. Major companies, advocacy groups, and individuals across the country had pledged their support. The incident that began as an indignity at an airfield had transformed into a movement, one that Isaiah was determined to see through. Sitting in his office late that night, Isaiah reflected on the journey so far. There was still much work to be done, but for the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel hopeful. Change was happening. And this was just the beginning. A reckoning and a path forward. The week following the CLEAR initiative's launch had been a whirlwind for Isaiah Brooks. News outlets continued to spotlight the incident at Westchester Executive Airfield, and his efforts to turn personal humiliation into systemic reform were widely lauded. But the story wasn't without controversy. As much support as Isaiah received, there were detractors, people who dismissed his efforts as overblown or accused him of using the situation for personal gain. Isaiah, however, remained steadfast. He knew the backlash was part of the process and saw it as an opportunity to engage in even deeper conversations about bias and accountability. His calendar filled quickly with interviews, town halls, and meetings with corporate leaders eager to align their brands with the clear initiative. Yet, amidst all the external activity, Isaiah felt the weight of ensuring the movement didn't lose momentum. Back at Westchester Executive Airfield, Teresa Morales was in the middle of her own reckoning. The bias training sessions had concluded their first phase, and she was reviewing feedback from employees. Most responses were positive, with staff expressing a newfound awareness of their biases and a commitment to change. But some comments revealed lingering resistance. One anonymous note read, "I don't see why we're being punished for one guy's mistake. This training feels like overkill." Teresa sighed as she read the words. She knew that changing minds would take time and that some employees might never fully embrace the shift in culture. But she also knew that change wasn't optional. Carlos, she called to the young guard who had shared his story during training. He had since become one of her most vocal advocates for the new protocols. "Can you gather the team for a quick meeting? I want to address some of the feedback we've received." Within minutes, the staff assembled in the break room. Teresa stood before them, her hands clasped tightly. "I've been reviewing your feedback from the training sessions," she began. "And while I'm encouraged by much of what I've read, I want to address the concerns some of you have raised." She held up the anonymous comment. "I understand that some of you feel this training is unnecessary or punitive. But let me be clear, this isn't about punishment. It's about growth. It's about ensuring that what happened to Mr. Brooks never happens again, not just because it's bad for business, but because it's wrong. If we're serious about being a world-class facility, we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard." Carlos spoke up. "Teresa's right. Look, I used to think this stuff didn't matter, that it was just politics. But after going through the training, I realized how many assumptions I've made about people without even knowing it. We can't change the past, but we can do better going forward." The room fell silent. Slowly, heads began to nod. Teresa felt a flicker of hope. Meanwhile, Isaiah's focus had shifted to the upcoming Clear Initiative Summit. Scheduled for the following month, the event was designed to bring together leaders from various industries to discuss best practices for implementing the initiative. Cheryl Daniels and her team had been working tirelessly to secure speakers and sponsors, and the lineup was impressive: CEOs, activists, educators, and even a few celebrities. "This summit is going to set the tone for everything we're trying to accomplish," Cheryl said during a planning call. "We need to make sure it's not just a series of speeches but a platform for real collaboration and action." "Agreed," Isaiah replied. "Let's structure the agenda around breakout sessions. Give people the chance to brainstorm solutions tailored to their industries. And I want to make sure we highlight stories from individuals who've experienced bias firsthand. Personal stories resonate in ways data alone can't." Cheryl nodded. "We're on it." As preparations for the summit continued, Isaiah received a surprising invitation. Teresa Morales had reached out, asking if he would return to Westchester Executive Airfield to speak with the staff directly. She believed that hearing from Isaiah himself could solidify the lessons from the training and inspire her team to fully embrace the changes. Isaiah agreed, though he knew the visit would be emotionally charged. When the day arrived, he walked into the same terminal where the incident had occurred, his presence commanding but calm. The staff gathered in a semicircle, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Teresa introduced him. "Mr. Brooks has graciously agreed to speak with us today." I hope you'll give him your full attention and take this opportunity to learn from his experience. Isaiah stepped forward, his voice steady. First, let me say that I appreciate the steps you've taken since the incident. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. And it starts with acknowledging the ways we've fallen short. He paused, letting his words sink in. What happened to me here wasn't just about one guard's actions. It was about a system that allowed those actions to go unchecked. But I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to work with you to ensure that this terminal becomes a place where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Isaiah shared his story, not just the details of the incident but the emotions it had stirred in him. He spoke about growing up in Brooklyn, facing similar biases throughout his life, and his determination to create opportunities for others through his work. By the time he finished, the room was silent, the weight of his words palpable. Carlos was the first to break the silence. Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Brooks. It's clear we have a lot of work to do, but I think we're ready to do it. Others nodded in agreement, and Teresa felt a surge of pride in her team. As Isaiah left the terminal, he felt a sense of closure. The journey wasn't over, but this chapter had reached a turning point. The CLEAR initiative was gaining momentum, the airfield staff were committed to change, and Isaiah's story had sparked conversations far beyond the walls of Westchester. Driving away, he glanced at his phone. A notification popped up, an email from Mia Johnson, the high school student who had written to him earlier. Mr. Brooks, I saw your speech at the airfield on the news. It reminded me that even when things seem unfair, we can use our voices to make a difference. Thank you for inspiring me. Isaiah smiled, his resolve strengthened. The work was far from finished, but moments like these reminded him why it mattered. A legacy of change. The weeks that followed Isaiah Brooks's visit to Westchester Executive Airfield were transformative, not just for the terminal, but for the broader community that had watched the events unfold. The CLEAR initiative's reach expanded rapidly, with companies, schools, and even government agencies signing on to adopt its framework. What began as a painful moment of discrimination had blossomed into a national movement for equity and accountability. One morning, Isaiah sat in his office reviewing a progress report on the CLEAR initiative. His assistant, Jordan, entered with a wide grin. Mr. Brooks, you need to see this, Jordan said, handing him a tablet. On the screen was a video of a young woman standing on a stage at a high school auditorium. It was Mia Johnson, the teenager from Atlanta who had written to Isaiah weeks earlier. The caption read, Student Speech on Overcoming Bias Inspired by Isaiah Brooks. Isaiah hit play. Mia's voice was steady but impassioned as she addressed her classmates. When I heard about what happened to Mr. Brooks, I was angry, Mia said. But I was also inspired. He didn't just walk away from what happened, he used it to spark change. It made me realize that we all have the power to stand up against prejudice, no matter how young or small we feel. The video ended with a standing ovation from her classmates. Isaiah's chest swelled with pride. This was the ripple effect he had hoped for, the idea that one act of courage could inspire countless others. Let's reach out to her, Isaiah said to Jordan. I want to personally thank Mia and invite her to speak at the CLEAR Initiative Summit. The summit itself was a monumental event. Held in a sprawling convention center in Washington, D.C., it drew over 1,000 attendees from across the country. The lineup included corporate leaders, educators, policymakers, and activists, all united by a shared commitment to dismantling systemic bias. Isaiah stood backstage, watching as Cheryl Daniels kicked off the event with an opening address. The CLEAR initiative isn't just a program, Cheryl said, her voice echoing through the packed auditorium. It's a promise to create spaces where everyone belongs, where everyone is valued, and where no one is judged by assumptions. As Cheryl's speech concluded, Isaiah stepped onto the stage to thunderous applause. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the diverse crowd before him. When I started the CLEAR initiative, it wasn't just about what happened to me, he began. It was about what happens to so many people every single day. Bias, whether implicit or explicit, robs people of opportunities, dignity, and sometimes even their lives. But here's the thing, it doesn't have to be this way. Together, we have the power to rewrite the narrative. He shared the stage with individuals whose lives had been touched by the initiative. Among them was Mia Johnson, who received a standing ovation for her heartfelt speech about the power of youth in driving change. "If we want a better future," Mia said, "we have to build it ourselves. And that starts with having the courage to speak up, even when it's hard." As the summit wrapped up, Isaiah took a moment to reflect on the journey. Back in his hotel room, he scrolled through messages and social media posts about the event. One comment stood out: Isaiah Brooks turned a moment of injustice into a movement of hope. "We need more leaders like him." Isaiah smiled, but he knew the work was far from over. Change was not a destination but a journey, and the path ahead would require sustained effort and vigilance. Yet, for the first time in a long time, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Meanwhile, back at Westchester Executive Airfield, the culture shift was evident. Employees like Carlos Ramirez had taken on leadership roles in promoting inclusivity, and even those who had initially resisted the changes began to embrace them. Frank Miller, the security guard whose actions had sparked the incident, had undergone extensive training and issued a public apology to Isaiah. Though he had been reinstated, his demeanor was noticeably different, more reserved, more thoughtful. One day, Teresa Morales received a letter addressed to the staff. It was from Isaiah. "To the team at Westchester Executive Airfield. Thank you for taking the difficult but necessary steps to create a more inclusive environment. Change is never easy, but your efforts show that it's possible. Let this be a reminder that progress is not about perfection but about persistence. Keep going. You have my respect and my gratitude. Sincerely, Isaiah Brooks." The letter was framed and placed in the staff break room, a symbol of how far they had come. Months later, as Isaiah boarded his private jet for another cross-country trip, he felt a sense of peace. The airfield staff greeted him warmly, their smiles genuine and welcoming. As the jet ascended into the sky, Isaiah looked out the window, the clouds below a reminder of how high he had climbed, and how much higher there was to go. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a legacy, one built on courage, resilience, and the unwavering belief that everyone, everywhere, deserved to belong.